The Gaza Strip stands on the precipice once again after a period of relative calm brought about by a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas. Tensions have escalated dramatically. The recent announcement by Hamas to delay the release of Israeli hostages has cast a long shadow over the fragile peace. This unexpected development has sparked outrage in Israel and raised serious concerns about the fate of the remaining captives. The ceasefire, painstakingly negotiated over weeks, offered a glimmer of hope for both sides. It promised a respite from the cycle of violence that has plagued the region for years. The agreement included a phased release of hostages and prisoners, a move seen as crucial for building trust and paving the way for a more lasting peace. The recent breakdown in the agreement threatens to unravel any progress made and plunges the region back into uncertainty. It underscores the deep mistrust and animosity that continues to define the relationship between Israel and Hamas. As both sides harden their positions, the international community watches with growing apprehension, fearing a return to open conflict. Hamas, the militant group that controls the Gaza Strip, has cited several reasons for its decision to postpone the release of Israeli hostages. Central to their argument is the allegation that Israel has failed to uphold its end of the ceasefire agreement. Hamas claims that Israel has not fully implemented agreed-upon measures, including the repatriation of displaced Palestinians to northern Gaza. Furthermore, Hamas accuses Israel of targeting Palestinians with shelling and imposing restrictions on humanitarian aid deliveries to the Gaza Strip. These actions, they argue, constitute a breach of trust and undermine the spirit of the ceasefire. The timing of Hamas's announcement, coming just days before the scheduled hostage release, has amplified the sense of betrayal and anger in Israel. Many view it as a calculated tactic by Hamas to exploit the situation and extract further concessions from Israel. The international community has urged Hamas to reconsider its decision and prioritize the safe return of the hostages. However, Hamas remains resolute, insisting that Israel must first address their grievances before any further progress can be made. Israel has reacted with fury and a firm resolve to Hamas's announcement. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has denounced the move as a flagrant violation of the ceasefire agreement and a testament to Hamas's true intentions. He has vowed that Israel will not succumb to pressure tactics and will hold Hamas fully accountable for the safety and well-being of the hostages. In response to the escalating crisis, the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, have been placed on high alert. Military leaders have been instructed to prepare for a range of scenarios, including a potential ground offensive into Gaza. While Israel maintains that it prefers a diplomatic solution, it has made it clear that it will not hesitate to use military force to secure the release of its citizens. The Israeli public, already deeply divided over the ceasefire agreement, is now united in its condemnation of Hamas. The hostage crisis has reignited calls for a more forceful response to Hamas's actions. There is growing pressure on the government to abandon any further negotiations and to prioritize the use of military might to crush Hamas definitively. Section 4. Uncertain terms of peace. The current ceasefire agreement, reached after weeks of intense negotiations, was intended to mark a turning point in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It outlined a roadmap for de-escalation, including the phased release of hostages and prisoners, as well as measures to address the dire humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. The first phase of the agreement, which involved the release of 21 hostages in exchange for over 500 Palestinian prisoners, was hailed as a significant breakthrough. It offered a rare glimpse of cooperation between the two sworn enemies and raised hopes for further progress. However, the agreement remained fragile from the outset. It was built on a foundation of deep mistrust and was plagued by ambiguity regarding key aspects of its implementation. The lack of clarity surrounding issues such as the timing of hostage releases and the scope of humanitarian aid deliveries created fertile ground for misunderstandings and accusations. Section 5. Hostages' plight, a humanitarian crisis. The plight of the Israeli hostages held captive by Hamas has become a focal point of the current crisis. Their families, enduring agonizing uncertainty and fear, have issued desperate pleas for their loved ones' safe return. The recent release of 3 hostages who were reportedly in a state of severe malnutrition and psychological distress has only heightened concerns about the conditions of those still held captive. The hostages' families have called on the international community to exert pressure on Hamas to prioritize their humanitarian obligations. They argue that the hostages' release should not be contingent on political concessions and that their well-being should transcend the complexities of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Hostages and Missing Families Forum, an organization representing the families of Israelis held captive or missing, has condemned Hamas's decision to delay the release as cruel and inhumane. They have urged all parties involved to prioritize the hostages' safe return and to uphold their obligations under international humanitarian law. Section 6. Israeli Voices and the Aid Debate. Within Israel, the hostage crisis has sparked a heated debate about the government's handling of the situation and its broader policy towards Hamas. Hardline voices within the government and the opposition have seized on the crisis to renew calls for a more forceful response to Hamas's actions. They argue that Israel's policy of restraint has only emboldened Hamas and that a decisive military operation is necessary to deter future aggression. Former Israeli Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir has emerged as a prominent voice, advocating for a more hawkish stance. He has called for a massive fire attack on Gaza and a complete halt to all humanitarian aid to the Strip in response to Hamas's decision to delay the hostage release. Ben-Gvir's views, while extreme, reflect a growing sentiment within Israeli society that Hamas cannot be trusted and that dialogue with the group is futile. This perspective has gained traction in light of Hamas's perceived betrayal of the ceasefire agreement and its disregard for the hostages' well-being. Section 7. The Uncertain Path Forward. As the crisis in Gaza enters a critical phase, the path forward remains shrouded in uncertainty. The breakdown of trust between Israel and Hamas has cast a long shadow over the prospects for a negotiated solution. The international community, while united in its condemnation of Hamas's actions, appears powerless to break the impasse. The ongoing truce talks in Qatar, once seen as a beacon of hope, have been thrown into disarray by the latest developments. It remains unclear whether Hamas's decision to delay the hostage release represents a negotiating tactic or a genuine intention to abandon the peace process altogether. The stakes could not be higher. A return to open conflict between Israel and Hamas would have devastating consequences for both sides, particularly for the civilian population of Gaza, which has already endured years of suffering and deprivation. The international community must redouble its efforts to find a peaceful resolution to the crisis, one that addresses the legitimate grievances of both sides while upholding the fundamental principles of international law and human rights.